T-minus 20 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
And we are live. Hello, everyone. It is November 13th, 2024. It is 6 p.m. local time where I am here in Texas, although it currently feels like midnight. I am still not on it with the time change here. If you're in the US, you know the struggle. Let me know in the comment section if you can hear me, if you can see me okay, if everything's working. I have not done a live stream in a hot minute, and trying to see if my computer is cooperating on my end, but I hope that y'all are having a good day, a good night, wherever you are in the world. And, you know, it's interesting. I had decided earlier today that I was going to do a live stream. I was thinking that I would talk about, you know, just some of the cabinet picks that Trump has announced so far, some of the speculation. And then we got the onslaught of breaking news this afternoon that was just one after another when it came to his cabinet picks. So I'll be going through some of the latest here when it comes to the fact that he chose Tulsi Gabbard in his cabinet, notably not as Secretary of State, but as Director of National Intelligence, which I do think was a very significant role for her, given everything that she has been through. But at the same time, he also chose Marco Rubio for Secretary of State. And I think that's one of those calls that Trump did because of the outside influence, aka the $100 million check from Miriam Adelson that was given right to his campaign. I think that that was definitely talking, but I think that that's also going to be one of those decisions that Trump lives to regret on a few different levels. Although I'm sure everything is going to be blamed on Marco Rubio, or should I say little Marco Rubio, as Trump would prefer to refer to him, at least the Trump of 2015, because as you may have seen, some of Trump's previous tweets from 2015 and 2016 are now circulating around on the internet. And yes, I know this was, 9 years ago when he was making those comments, but that was the Trump before he was in office. And I feel like that was probably the most honest version of Trump we ever did get before he saw what it was like to actually work in his first administration. So we'll be discussing all of the latest there. And I actually want to start off with kind of what we know about someone like Marco Rubio, because, if you've been following him just during his time as a Florida senator, sure, but also during his time back when he ran for the 2016 Republican nomination, because that's when you had Trump and Rubio head to head. That's when you had Trump openly calling out Rubio. And when I think of this man, I just think of the fact that he is a hawk at his core, right? He is a neocon. He is who we talk about when we talk about someone who never met a war that they didn't like. I know he's made some comments, recently about Russia, which we'll get into kind of what he has to say there when it comes to U.S. support for the war in Ukraine, and how he's another one of those Republicans that is being very careful with the rhetoric that they choose while watching Trump and what they think that he is going to do. But we also need to remember what Rubio used to say about Trump, because you've seen those tweets, or you may have seen the tweets that were going around coming from Trump back in 2015, talking about Rubio, how he was just a puppet of the Adelsons, which I think he's absolutely correct in that. But Rubio was also talking about Trump at the time. So let's take a listen to what he had to say back in 2016.
There is no way we are going to allow a con artist to take over the conservative movement, and Donald Trump is a con artist.
Donald Trump is a con artist.
He's a con man. I think it's time to unmask him for what he is. A con man who's taking advantage of people's fears and anxieties about the future, portraying himself as some sort of strong guy. He's not a strong guy.
He doesn't sweat. He doesn't sweat because his pores are clogged from the spray tan that he uses.
You all have friends that are thinking about voting for Donald Trump. Friends, do not let friends vote for con artists.
All right, so that's what he had to say about Trump back in 2016. And I know you may be thinking, well, J.D. Vance, Trump's literal running mate, literally compared him to Hitler before he made that turnaround. So at least there's that. But it's important to remember that at the end of the day, Marco Rubio is still a neocon. I do not believe for 1 second that he has any loyalty to Trump whatsoever. I think he's just focused on what is the best position I can get in a second Trump administration. And hey, he got it. He's the Secretary of State, which is still just mind-boggling to think about. All right, I'm going to attempt to put a website up on that. Again, bear with me. It's been a minute since I have done this. I'm going to attempt to put a website up here on the screen if you can see. All right, looks like I did that the right way. We're getting there slowly but surely. Okay, so we had ABC News. They did their version of kind of announcing that Marco Rubio was going to be Trump's Secretary of State. They say that they noted that Rubio has served in the Senate since 2011. He is currently the vice chair of the Senate Select Committee on Foreign Intelligence and also sits on the Chamber's Committee on Foreign Relations. Now, Trump in his statement said that Rubio is a highly respected leader and a very powerful voice for freedom. He will be a strong advocate for our nation, a true friend for our allies, and a fearless warrior who will never back down to our adversaries. Now, they also noted that several long-serving State Department officials told ABC News that they respect Rubio's extensive foreign policy experience and view him as unlikely to overly politicize the Secretary of State role. I do not believe that for a second whatsoever, right? It's mind-boggling to me. And I know that people like, Ben Shapiro and others who are, very pro-Israel are cheering on Marco Rubio and cheering on his appointment to Secretary of State. But I just think it's going to be one of those that Trump is going to regret. Now, granted, when it comes to Rubio, he's someone who is extremely abundantly pro-Israel. He's someone who is very hawkish on China, who is very hawkish on Iran. And if you've been watching my videos over the last week, then you probably gathered that when it comes to the cabinet picks that we've all been talking about, that's the thing that they have had in common. I've started calling it the Republican trifecta, right? They come out, they are abundantly supportive of Israel. They act as though Israel can do no wrong when it is openly committing genocide in front of all of our eyes. And then at the same time, they act as though, the U.S. should go to war with Iran. I mean, that's something that Rubio has said in past interviews. I did not have a clip that I included on this one, but I was watching a past interview that he did where he was being asked, if Iran does acquire nuclear weapons, should the U.S. go to war with them? And he was saying yes. He was saying that's completely fine, that he has no issues with that. And I think that, being in a situation, and that's not to say that Iran was threatening the U.S. in any way. That's just to say that the U.S. has been the bully of really the world for the last several decades. And Marco Rubio is right there in the middle of it. He believes in the U.S. being an empire and in it going around and essentially telling everyone else how to live their lives. Now, one thing that I did think was interesting here, and this goes back to what I was saying about the fact that you have a lot of these Republicans that they kind of see the writing on the wall when it comes to Russia. So they initially were very supportive of U.S. support for Ukraine. Now they realize that politically they have to act like it's Biden's war, right? They have to act like, oh, this is a Biden administration thing, therefore we need to pull U.S. support for it. Now, Rubio hasn't done that I've seen, but he was very careful with his words in a recent interview in the way that he described what is likely to end up happening in Ukraine and what role the U.S. should have in getting to that point. So let's take a listen to what he had to say during a recent interview.
No, because I think, unfortunately, I'm not on Russia's side, but unfortunately the reality of it is that the way the war in Ukraine is going to end is with a negotiated settlement. And I want, and we want, and I believe Donald Trump wants, for Ukraine to have more leverage in that negotiation. But in order to be in a position to be a broker who can bring about that agreement, I think he's going to preserve what he says. He approaches these things as someone not in politics or diplomacy, but as someone with a background in business. It's not going to be easy to do, but at least there's a defined goal. The Biden administration has not defined what victory means in Ukraine. They have not defined this is what victory looks like. And if you press them, they will tell you what I have just said to you, which is the way this conflict ultimately ends is with a negotiation. And so I don't know why we can't just say that. And we hope that when that time comes, there is more leverage on the Ukrainian side than on the Russian side. That really is the goal here in my mind. And I think that's what Donald Trump is trying to say, but he's going to say it like a businessman. But Biden won't even tell us what victory is.
Okay, so that's the interesting part here, right? When he's talking about a negotiated settlement in Ukraine, I look at that and I say, I see where he's going with that, right? He's not saying, oh, the U.S. just has to give Ukraine, X amount of military aid and that's magically going to fix everything and somehow it's going to help Kiev beat Russia. But what he's also saying there is that the U.S. needs to put more and more political pressure on Russia to push them to the point where we have some sort of talks and Kiev somehow has more bargaining power. Now, I still don't understand how he thinks he's going to get there. I will also note there's another appointee to Trump's cabinet that we'll talk about a little bit later, Congressman Mike Waltz, who is going to serve as the next national security advisor. So essentially the next version of John Bolton. He also believes this claim that, oh, we just need to put pressure on Russia, right? That we need to remove restrictions on Kiev's use of long-range weapons against Russia and into Russian territory, even though Russian President Putin has specifically come out and noted that, hey, if you do that, Russia is going to treat it as if the US and all of these other Western NATO allies, as if they are the ones firing those weapons deep into Russian territory, because technically they are. And so even knowing the warnings that have been put out there, it's interesting to see how Rubio and how Mike Waltz as well think that, oh, we just have to put enough pressure on Russia, that, oh, we just have to get the upper hand. And it's like, especially right now when we're nearly 3 years into this, you've got NATO in a position where they're struggling to just keep Kiev on life support. You've got countries across Europe trying to figure out what in the world they're going to do. I mean, Boris Johnson, who always pops up when you need him for some Ukraine commentary. He comes in and claims that, oh, we could be sending British troops into Ukraine if they look like they're headed for defeat. So basically what someone like Boris Johnson is saying is that we would be fine with going all the way to World War III if it means that we prevent Kiev from some sort of quote unquote defeat. Now, of course, Trump has said that he's going to come in and he's going to end this war in 24 hours or end it as president-elect. He's talked he's talked very, as he would say, bigly for himself, but he's set the bar very high for himself. Let's put it that way. And I know I'm very skeptical as to what he's going to be able to accomplish. And I will say, just a plug for a later video, because I talked to our friend of the show, Mark Sloboda, earlier today. And this was one of the things that we talked about was, okay, what is the U.S. going to present to Russia that is going to get them to sign on to any sort of agreement, right? What is it that they are going to say? Okay, because this claim that, oh, we're just going to have the U.S. promise Russia that, or that Kiev won't join NATO for 20 years. Russia's not going to agree to that. That's not appealing to them at a time when they're embroiled in this conflict that they're currently winning. Unless the U.S. just straight up says, we're pulling out, that's it, and there are some kind of major promises that come along with it that do not include NATO having the freedom to arm Ukraine to the teeth over the next 20 years while there's some sort of pause or ceasefire, I can't see Russia signing on to any of this. So it's very interesting to me that you have this Trump team kind of trying to figure out, okay, what are we looking at here? What are we up against here? And I'm very curious to see how they handle things once Trump actually gets in office with the team that he has, because he is surrounded by neocons here. And even if, you look at Marco Rubio, you look at Mike Waltz and you go, okay, they're way more hawkish on China and on Iran. That doesn't mean they're not hawkish on Russia. It just means they've toned down the rhetoric on Russia because right now they see it as Biden's war, right? Right now they see it as, okay, Trump has said that he wants to end the war in Ukraine. Therefore, I'm going to go the political route. I'm going to tone down my rhetoric a little bit, but that does not mean that they necessarily want there to be peace with Russia at the end of the day. All right, I'm going to check in on some of the comments coming in now. All right, it looks like y'all can hear me and see me, which is a good thing that I have gotten to this point. I've got comments saying America cannot afford two wars. Oh, I agree 100%. And I think that the position that the US has itself in, it's not America first. We're not doing anything for America first. And Trump, when you look at his cabinet, he's not choosing quote unquote America first people. He's choosing people that he thinks are going to be loyal to him, sure, but he's choosing Israel first candidates all across the board. And I think it's very telling with Marco Rubio, especially, that you've got Trump looking at all that money again that he got from Miriam Adelson. You cannot convince me that that did not have a significant role in him being in the position that he is and deciding, all right, Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, Elise Stefanik as UN ambassador. She's another Israel first candidate. And the list truly goes on and on. And it is incredibly concerning to see the situation that we're in, to see so many of these people. I mean, as much as I should not be shocked that Rubio is Secretary of State, I am a little bit surprised that Trump went that route given everything that he campaigned on. And I've watched his first term, right? I've watched the way that Trump operates, where he campaigns on one thing and then he gets into office and does the exact opposite. And I'm sitting here watching him going into a second term going, I'm even surprised at this one that he flip-flopped as quickly as he did. Even though I did expect the flip-flop, I don't know that I expected it to the point of Marco Rubio. So it's been interesting to see how it has gotten to this point. I will say that much. Now, I do want to check in on, let me see here, the next topic that I wanted to bring up, which was Trump deciding to appoint Tulsi Gabbard as the Director of National Intelligence. Now, also a callback to the conversation that I was having with Sloboda earlier that I will be posting later tonight. We had also talked about the fact that, look, Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr., these are the people that Trump surrounded himself with, these former Democrats who, had disavowed the Democratic Party and how awful it was, had signed on and endorsed Trump. Tulsi Gabbard even became a Republican. And yet you watch Trump kind of throw them to the wayside for a few days. I still don't know what he's going to do with RFK Jr., but he still did, right? And you watch him then focus on all of his neocons, and you wonder, okay, what is he going to do with these two individuals who have given up so much to support him? Now, let's get into the Tulsi Gabbard of it all, shall we? As we keep an eye on, again, making sure that I'm doing this right. The New York Times had their version, their write-up of it. They noted that Trump chose Gabbard, a former Democratic congresswoman who became one of his most enthusiastic backers, they said, to serve as the Director of National Intelligence. Gabbard is a lieutenant colonel in the Army Reserve who served in Iraq, has been a longtime critic of the foreign policy establishment. Her nomination is another sign that Trump intends to give top foreign policy jobs to supporters who are deeply skeptical of the effectiveness of U.S. military intervention abroad. Yeah, I don't know if I fully believe that when it comes to some of his other picks, but okay. In a statement, Trump praised Gabbard and said that she would bring a fearless spirit to the intelligence agencies and secure peace through strength. The statement announcing the nomination said she was a former Democrat who had joined the Republican Party because of President Trump's leadership and how he had been able to transform the Republican Party, bringing it back to the party of the people and the party of peace. Now, they also noted that along with John Ratcliffe, Trump's choice to lead the CIA, Gabbard would be a top intelligence advisor to the White House. She would oversee 18 spy agencies and would be responsible for preparing the president's daily brief, a written intelligence summary assembled each morning. In his first administration, Trump did not often read the written summary, they say, but he held in-person intelligence briefings, often twice a week or more, engaging his briefers on world affairs, at least on topics that interested him. I mean, that's probably a fair assessment there. But one of the most notable parts about the fact that you have Gabbard in this position is that, as you may remember, she was placed on a terror watch list earlier this year. And she spoke about that at a recent Trump rally where she was able to kind of speak out and share her story. And again, this is a woman who has served in the military, who's still in the Army Reserves. So any kind of accusations of treason, of which I know she's gone head to head with Hillary Clinton a bit, but any kind of accusation of treason against her, that is so much more meaningful because of her service and because of her place in the military. And Democrats know that. They were not happy with her and the fact that she challenged the establishment. Now, I know that she is not perfect. I know that there is a lot of criticism out there of her. I'm not going to deny that. There's plenty that Tulsi Gabbard and I do not agree on. But I do think it's interesting that she went from being on this watch list to now the director of national intelligence. So let's take a listen to her description of what she went through earlier this year.
I never would have imagined as an American and as a soldier that we would live in a country in my lifetime where we would feel like we have to self-censor what we say, that we couldn't criticize our own government for fear of them labeling us as a domestic terrorist. But this is the country that we live in. The very next day after I did an interview with Laura Ingraham on Fox News, and I talked about how dangerous Kamala Harris would be as our president and commander-in-chief, I was added to a secret domestic terror watch list called Quiet Skies. Shortly after, an FBI agent named Steve Friend blew the whistle on how the FBI agents were being used essentially as the Democrats' police force to go after their political opponents. They basically took away his job, doxed him, exposed his medical records publicly. I spoke with him today, and he is unemployed and unemployable because of what the FBI did to him. We are just two of many who are experiencing the political retaliation under the Harris-Biden administration. In America, we cannot allow that to stand.
All right, so this is a major decision, and I think that this is a bit of a shot at the U.S. intelligence community coming from Trump saying, okay, and we know everything that Trump has been through over the last few years. Is as much criticism as I have for him, and as much as I do think when you look at his appointments, I think he's making a lot of bad decisions. I think in the case of Tulsi Gabbard that this is going to be very interesting. It has the potential to be very good. I mean, she has the potential to clean house in the U.S. intelligence community. I'm curious to see what she does, but at the same time, I'm also cautiously optimistic because, listen, this is the world of politics at the end of the day. I have no expectations for how she's actually going to handle things, but I am watching to see. I'm open to being surprised on this one when it comes to how she could possibly take on the intelligence community after everything that she has been through. And hey, I mean, when it comes down to it, I know that there were a lot of people calling for and rooting for her to be Secretary of State. I think she would have been a hell of a lot better Secretary of State than Marco Rubio, that's for sure. But interesting to see the appointment she did get on this one. I mean, when we look back at the history of Tulsi Gabbard, we remember her going and meeting with Syrian President Bashar al-Assad at a time that the U.S. was actively trying to overthrow him. Not that they aren't now, but they've kind of pulled back on that, at least publicly a little bit, because they failed so miserably. And Tulsi Gabbard was like, you know what? Why don't I go meet with him in person, right? You guys are claiming that he's this big bad guy. Why don't we talk with him? That is the kind of mentality that we need in a Secretary of State. I don't think that we're going to get it from Marco Rubio. I'm curious to see how he handles foreign diplomats again, going back to him. But I do think it's interesting to see the fact that she was chosen after everything that she has been through, everything that those whistleblowers have been through, and a lot at stake here for kind of, I don't even want to say the U.S. establishment, because I don't think that the U.S. establishment is going to change significantly based on any one or two people, right? Even if Trump was actually committed to delivering on any of his campaign promises, I still don't have the hope necessarily that he would, but we'll see. We'll keep an eye on what happens and kind of revisit it as we go. Let's just say that much. But another one that I wanted to talk about was the appointment of Trump's defense secretary, Pete Hegseth. Now, I saw these stories about him. I honestly was not a name that I was familiar with, right? Whenever I heard that Trump had chosen him, and everyone was describing him as this Fox News host, right? Of course, he's got a military background, but they're like, look, he's on Fox and Friends weekend, apparently. I don't know what that says about him, but there was a lot of talk about him. And then I start looking into him more and more, and I'm going, okay, I'm assuming right off the bat that he's, again, pro-Israel, anti-Iran, anti-China, and he is all of those things. However, he is, unfortunately for us, much, much more than that, as we had his talk about Israel and about loyalty to Israel and how he essentially thinks it's one and the same as loyalty to the U.S. So let's take a listen to a little speech that our new Secretary of Defense gave.
Anyone that wants to take the stage and talk about dual loyalty is dead wrong. What this organization represents, what Western civilization represents today, is an understanding that Zionism and Americanism are the front lines of Western civilization and freedom in our world today.
All right, my apologies to your ears. I thought that I had the volume kind of regulated on these clips to where it was at a normal volume. So if that was extremely loud, then I'm sorry. Yeah, to get up there and to claim that pro-Zionism is the same as pro-Americanism, right? Being pro the country that you are from, that you're currently living in here in the US, is just mind-boggling to me. I mean, that this is the world that we currently live in, with someone like this being our Secretary of Defense. And I have every expectation that the Defense Secretary is going to have some ties to Raytheon or Boeing or Lockheed Martin or some defense contractor, right? That's kind of par for the course. But this man and his loyalty to Israel is just on another level. And this is coming at a time when Israel has openly been committing genocide for over a year now. You've got, people within Trump's cabinet, like, again, going back to Mike Waltz, who think that Israel needs to, quote unquote, finish the job. In other words, finish the genocide. And you just see Trump adding more and more people. It's not just that they're pro-Israel or even that they're pro-Zionism, but that they are so incredibly rabid about it. And I look at the current situation in Gaza and in Lebanon, where you have Israel killing, dozens of civilians on a regular basis, thousands of civilians overall, likely much more than we even know when it comes to the overall death toll, especially in Gaza. And you look at the current situation that the U.S. is facing, and the Biden administration is doing absolutely nothing. I know there's a lot of talk about, what is this going to be like when Trump comes in, and it could very well be worse. But it's hard to imagine the U.S. letting Israel have even more free reign than they currently do. And yet that's the conversation that we're having. We're not having a conversation about, maybe they're finally going to rein Israel in. Maybe they're going to have some talk of an arms embargo, some accountability, which again, the only quote unquote talk of accountability that we've had from the Biden administration was Antony Blinken, our current Secretary of State, sending a letter to Israel a month ago, a month ago exactly, saying, oh, you've got to make sure that you let more humanitarian aid in, as Israel is actively starving out around 400,000 Palestinians in northern Gaza. You've got the Biden administration saying, hey, you need to let some more humanitarian aid trucks in, essentially feed these people before you kill them instead of just trying to starve them out of this area. And 1 month later, not only has Israel not done a single thing to even try to comply, but you've got the Biden administration. What are they going to do? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. There's no accountability whatsoever. And then you've got this zealous Trump administration coming in with, cabinet appointees that are just ready to go. And it's like they're serving up Israel whatever it wants on a silver platter. And no one in the world is doing anything about it, right? Everyone's just kind of standing back and watching as this happens. And it still, to me, is just mind-boggling to watch this happen at this point. I think this will be one of those times that we look back in history and think, what was the rest of the world doing as they were letting the Palestinians starve, letting them be killed and be targeted in just such horrific ways by Israel with weapons that were made in the USA. Now, this is not the only thing that Pete Hegseth is hawkish on, as he made some very choice comments back in 2022 when he was talking about Russia. So I want to take a listen to what he had to say at that time.
One first big question: what's at stake?
What's at stake is repelling an authoritarian who basically is saying, I want the Soviet Union back, I want Ukraine back, I want Kiev back. And then what's at stake is making sure we don't allow it to become an Article 5 larger, broader war than that. So equipping and supplying Ukraine with what it needs faster than we have, and we haven't been doing it. The Biden administration has not been doing it fast enough so that they can further bog Putin down and push him back. It's going to be long, it's going to be bloody, but I think those are the stakes for the United States of America. I would encourage folks to go watch Who is Vladimir Putin on Fox Nation. It's great. It talks about how he views human nature. It's good, and it helps you get an understanding of how he views human nature and how he views his role in manipulating it and putting back the Soviet Union. When it comes to Ukraine, though, Harris, he's going to double down on the tactics he believes will bring civilians to their knees. You know why? He doesn't play by the rules of war. We call him a war criminal, and we do, and rightfully so. He doesn't care. Russia's not a signatory to the International Criminal Court. He doesn't feel any threat that he'll be held accountable. Ceasefires, you know what ceasefires are for him? An opportunity to reload.
Speaking of an opportunity to reload, I'll stop that right there. So this is our new Secretary of Defense, right? And I know that these are comments that he was making back in 2022, but it still is just so alarming to me to see so many of these people. I think there was a lot of speculation. We knew that we were going to get China hawks. We knew that we were going to get, people who were pro-Israel. We're talking about Republicans here, just as if we were talking about Democrats. They're all one and the same on that issue. So we knew that going into it, but I think that looking at the rhetoric coming from some of these candidates, it's just incredibly alarming all around to see this is what we are up against and this is what we are dealing with here in this country. And it makes me incredibly concerned. Again, going back to that conversation of what happens when Trump comes into office and his team comes up with some sort of deal and they present it to Russia and they present it to Zelensky and they say, okay, this is our suggestion for talks. And Russia says no. They're like, no, we're currently winning this conflict, first of all. Second of all, you're treating us as if we're the losing side, because every single proposal, and I know that these are just anonymous sources being quoted, in the mainstream media here in the West, so I always take it with a grain of salt, but every proposal that is talked about any kind of frozen conflict, it's going to be unacceptable to Russia, and it's treating Russia as if they are the losing side right now, as if they're just waiting for Trump to come in and begging for him to come up with some sort of a plan. That's not what's happening. And I think that Trump and his team are going to be in for a cold dose of reality when they get face to face with Putin and see what his demands are. And when there is eventually a phone call, I know that the Washington Post came out with their version, insisted that there was a phone call between Trump and Putin last Thursday. The Kremlin then came out and said that absolutely did not happen. But I think that when there is a phone call between the two of them, it's going to be very interesting to see how much Trump tries to, strong arm Putin if he tries to be friendly with him, right? And say kind of how he was with Biden today when they were at the White House and shaking hands and in a good mood there. Or if he tries to go about it from the route like the Washington Post claimed that he did, of going in and going, oh yeah, you need to not escalate the war in Ukraine because the US has a significant military presence in Europe. It's like, Putin is well aware of that, right? Russia is more than aware of just how much of a military presence the US has in Europe as a whole and also in Ukraine. Now, one more thing I will add about Pete Hegseth before, weird last name, before we move on to the next one is, okay, this man was in the military. He's our new Secretary of Defense. Has anyone seen the video of him throwing an axe? Because I feel like I could throw it better than he currently did. And let's take a look at that debacle.
With the axe, who's going to win this battle with the lumberjacks? That's coming up next. I'm putting my money on Clayton.
Like, that's the guy that is going to be the new Secretary of Defense. I don't even care that he was a Fox News host. I care that he can't throw an axe and that he's leading us to World War III. The World War III part is the more significant one there, obviously, but still, it is just insane to me to see the current situation that we are in with this just absolute hot mess of a cabinet. Now, one other cabinet appointee I will mention that I was surprised by, not even for better or for worse, just kind of the thought of, okay, interesting one that Trump chose. In some ways, it feels like when Trump is choosing his cabinet, he's got a one for you, one for me approach when it comes to some of these choices, was Matt Gaetz for Attorney General. Now, I will say, to me right now, and I may be missing a few parts of why this is significant. Right now, I just think it's absolutely hilarious that he chose Matt Gaetz as Attorney General. And apparently Republicans are losing their ever-loving minds. So we'll see if this man is actually confirmed. But let's take a look at what Axios and their good old anonymous sources had to say, because they always have them. They say that Republicans are stunned and disgusted as Trump taps Matt Gaetz for AG. They go on to say that, sorry, I'm scrolling too fast here. They go on to say that Trump shocked and appalled some Republican lawmakers on Wednesday by announcing plans to nominate Representative Matt Gaetz of Florida for Attorney General. Republicans' reaction to even Trump's most controversial nominations has been muted so far, but placing the scandal-prone right-winger in the nation's highest law enforcement role is a step too far for many. One House Republican, of course not named, says, "We wanted him out of the House. This isn't what we were thinking." Now, in a post on Truth Social, Trump praised Gaetz as a deeply gifted and tenacious attorney who has distinguished himself in Congress through his focus on achieving desperately needed reform at the Department of Justice. Gaetz followed up shortly thereafter with a post on X saying, quote, "It will be an honor to serve as President Trump's Attorney General." A graduate of William and Mary Law School, Gaetz briefly worked at a law firm before getting into politics. He was elected to Congress back in 2016. A right-wing firebrand who led the successful charge to oust former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. Gaetz was the subject of a now closed DOJ probe into allegations of child sex trafficking. You know, the world that we live in, the political world that we live in, just keeps getting more and more bizarre. But I'm very curious to see what Matt Gaetz does if he gets confirmed. And I still think, personally, now I know that there's, of course, a lot of talk about Matt Gaetz. I think the fact that they confirmed the news about Rubio, because remember, it was a few days ago, I believe on Sunday or Monday, that the New York Times had come out and had said that according to their anonymous sources, Marco Rubio was the pick for Secretary of State, but you didn't have the confirmation from the Trump team until today. So I do not think it was a coincidence that they waited and then announced Marco Rubio and Tulsi Gabbard back to back at about the same time, and then threw in Matt Gaetz there after that, because now what's everyone talking about? Matt Gaetz as Attorney General, and not so much about Marco Rubio for Secretary of State and everything that entails, how incredibly concerning that is for our country. So I do think that was notable, and I do think that was certainly done on purpose. Now, keeping an eye on some of the other nominations here, I know that we also have Kristi Noem for the head of the Department of Homeland Security. I mean, that's incredibly concerning for me, given her statements. Excuse me, and I apologize for all of the ads. I cannot get an ad blocker to work on my computer when it comes to any sort of news articles. It always ends in me fighting it, and so I usually just let the ads be and roll with them. So if that bothers you, then I'm sorry in advance. So they decided that, Trump decided, his team did, that Kristi Noem was going to be his pick for Homeland Security Secretary. Now, they, I guess, go into her, almost her bio here, the good old dog story. Oh, that's right. She wrote that book where she talked about killing her 14-month-old wire-haired pointer named Cricket. Now, at the time, there were people who said that story got her out of the running for being Trump's running mate, because there was talk about that. She does talk tough on immigration, but again, she's also extremely pro-Israel, extremely anti any sort of protesters who are pro-Palestinian. We talk about the right to free speech here in this country, the right to protest, and Kristi Noem is someone who certainly does not respect that right. From everything that I've seen, I know that she also was one who was in favor of legislation to change the definition of anti-Semitism to include the criticism of Israel, which is not the definition of anti-Semitism. I will die on that hill, but that was a conversation that we had here in this country, at least for months on end earlier this year and late last year. It'll be interesting to see if it comes up, how that is all going to play a role in it. But yeah, clearly Trump isn't too bothered by the fact that she murdered her puppy and is just going along with it. So we'll keep an eye on that one. Now, I also do want to note the appointment of Mike Waltz as National Security Advisor. I know I've kind of touched on that one a little bit throughout this hour and talked about the situation. And thank you guys for giving me pointers on ad blockers. That's always appreciated. I have not found one that has worked all the way through, so I will be sure to check those out. But I did want to note the appointment of Mike Waltz, because Waltz, tricky. We just went through with the Harris campaign and Tim Walz. But anyways, let's take a look in at what is being said about him, because I think that is another important one to keep an eye on. And you've got antiwar.com with their write-up on this one. They specifically noted that Waltz was a staunch supporter of the Ukraine proxy war early on and was one of the few members of Congress to suggest that the U.S. send military advisors into the country. He was also critical of President Biden for supposedly not being aggressive enough, as if Biden was not aggressive enough. It's just, again, mind-boggling to me. There is no difference between Democrats and Republicans. Back in 2023, Waltz began to express skepticism of the war, saying the U.S. involvement in the conflict was not sustainable. However, in an interview with NPR last week, Waltz suggested that he would advise the president to end the war in Ukraine by escalating it. Again, not how you end a war. When explaining how he thinks that Trump could bring both sides to the table, Waltz said that the U.S. could ramp up sanctions enforcement on Russia and support Ukraine using NATO-provided weapons for long-range strikes inside Russia, something that President Vladimir Putin has made clear would risk nuclear war. Waltz told NPR, quote, "First and foremost, you would enforce the actual energy sanctions on Russia. Russia is essentially a gas station with nukes, as the neocons always describe it. Putin is selling more oil and gas now than he did pre-war through China and Russia. And you couple that with unleashing our energy, lifting our LNG ban, and his economy and his war machine will dry up very quickly." Allegedly. Waltz also said, quote, "So I think that will get Putin to the table. We have leverage, like taking the handcuffs off of the long-range weapons we provided Ukraine as well. And then, of course, I think we have plenty of leverage with Zelensky to get them to the table." Now, when it comes to Iran, I do also want to note that Waltz said the U.S. must go back to maximum pressure, referring to the previous Trump administration's Iran policies, which involved withdrawing from the 2015 nuclear deal, imposing crippling economic sanctions, and assassinating Iranian Quds Force Commander General Qasem Soleimani. Waltz has also hyped up claims about Iran plotting to kill Trump, which Iranian officials have strongly denied. So notable to see that this is his national security advisor, right? That this is someone who is going to be in Trump's ear. He has surrounded himself with neocons on foreign policy. I know that he still has more people in his cabinet to announce, which is almost more concerning than anything else. But yeah, it really makes you see the situation that we currently are in, where you've got Trump in this place where we are looking at the road to World War III all around us at every turn, from whether it's with Russia or China or Iran in the Middle East. And I don't have confidence in Trump and his current cabinet because, as we know, the people within his cabinet are the people who are in his ear. I do not have confidence that they are going to be the ones to step up and say, we need to look at this rationally, that they are going to want to de-escalate instead of escalating even further. Now, as I've said in my videos, especially this week, I mean, we do live in a very different world than we did back in 2016 or even back in 2020. You know, we see a current situation where Trump is coming in acting as if this is 2016 all over again, acting as if Iran is isolated, acting as if Russia could be isolated. But we have to remember that during the 4 years that Trump has been out of office, Biden has been in office. And thanks to the Biden administration and their policies of trying to isolate Russia, we have watched Russia reduce its reliance on the U.S. in record time, on the West as a whole in record time. We've watched them increase their partnerships with countries like China, with India, and with Iran. So this idea that a Trump administration is just going to come in with their so-called maximum pressure campaign and that is just going to be the end of Iran, that is going to allow for regime change in Iran, I do not think it's going to be as easy as they think it is. And I do think that a direct war with Iran, even if it's some sort of proxy war that the U.S. is fighting through Israel, is going to be devastating for the U.S. and Israel if they let it get to that point. And we'll see how things turn out on that one if it does get to that point. But one more note on Ukraine, because I thought this was interesting. There's this new report out kind of warning about Ukraine, because right now the warning surrounding the Trump administration, given that you've had Trump come in and say that he's going to end this war in 24 hours, that he wants to see a solution, he wants to see the end of people dying, then the concern, I guess, for those in Kiev is that the U.S. is going to pull its support. Now, it likely will drastically reduce the military aid that it even has been sending over the last year, just because that's the situation that we're in right now. You don't have the excitement from Congress wanting to pass hundreds of billions of dollars for Ukraine as if they're doing something to take on Russia or to stand up to Russia, because as they've seen, that has not worked out like they hoped it would. And so the question is going to become, where is this going to leave us? So you got this recent report out claiming that, if I can click on the right tab here and make sure that I have the correct one, I do. All right. You've got this new report out claiming that Ukraine could feasibly raid the country's nuclear reactors to develop crude atomic weapons if the U.S. cuts off military aid, a briefing paper prepared for the Ministry of Defense has advised. They say that the Times reported on Wednesday that its authors at the National Institute for Strategic Studies believe that creating a simple atomic bomb at the United States, as the United States did within the framework of the Manhattan Project, would not be a difficult task 80 years later. Published by the Center for Army Conversion and Disarmament Studies, the report states that creating a simple atomic bomb, as the United States did within the framework of the Manhattan Project, would not be a difficult task 80 years later. I love how they literally repeated the same sentence, excuse me there. They also said that while Ukraine cannot enrich uranium, a process vital for building modern nuclear weapons, its 9 operating nuclear reactors contain an estimated 7 tons of plutonium. Its authors claimed this could be used to build bombs similar to the Fat Man device dropped on Nagasaki by the US back in 1945. While the Ukrainian Fat Man would only be a tenth as powerful as the device that leveled Nagasaki, the amount of plutonium in the country's reactors is sufficient for hundreds of warheads with a tactical yield of several kilotons. The author of the report also said that that would be enough to destroy an entire Russian airbase or concentrated military, industrial, or logistics installations. The exact nuclear yield would be unpredictable because it would use different isotopes of plutonium. Excerpts from the paper were published by the Times on Wednesday. According to the British newspaper, the report has been shared with Ukraine's deputy defense minister and will be presented at a conference attended by the country's defense and strategic industries ministers. All right, so all of that to say, it's interesting to see kind of the threats that are being thrown around here, right? That if the West happens to pull their support, then Ukraine could go nuclear literally, but could act in such a way that is reckless, that drastically increases the war with Russia. And I guess they would do that assuming that the US is just going to jump in and save them. Maybe that is their hope there, but it still is just mind-boggling to me to see the situation that we're currently in. I know that Zelensky is a little bit concerned right now. And to be fair, if an election were held in Ukraine tomorrow, I think Zelensky knows that he would not be the favorite, right? I think he knows that he would not be the one that everyone is going to be rallying around because of the fact he is forcing the men in his country to not only not leave his country, but to fight and die in this war. Right? He's sending them out to the battlefield to their death. And it's notable that you now have the Western media kind of admitting that the Ukrainian defenses on the battlefield are crumbling right now because we continue to see this situation where it's going nowhere good fast for the West. And I'm very curious to see if there is any kind of de-escalation that the US can bring, if that's anything that they actually want, or if Trump goes in and tries to strong arm Russia, right? If he goes in and decides that he's going to act as if he's going to take on Putin in some way, when Russia's looking at Trump going, buddy, you're only in office for 4 years here, right? We're not expecting that you are actually going to bring about any meaningful changes. A lot of that still remains to be seen. I'm also curious too, going back to Marco Rubio being labeled as Secretary of State and his focus in the past on Latin America, if we are going to see a shift coming from the US towards Latin America, if the US is suddenly going to be pushing for the overthrow of the president in democratically elected president in Venezuela, and if that is going to ramp up all over again. You know, we talk about the fact that Trump didn't include Mike Pompeo or Nikki Haley or John Bolton or Elliott Abrams in his second term, but it's like you're getting the versions of those people, in some cases worse. If you look at Elise Stefanik and you compare her to Nikki Haley, I never thought that I would say that Nikki Haley was the tame choice on anything, let alone support for Israel. But now you have Elise Stefanik shipping her off to the UN. And one other note that I did want to make, because I have seen an abundance of, hold on. I'm getting distracted by the chat. I apologize. Someone is saying super chats are not allowed here. They should be on. They may not, either they're not on or no one has sent any yet. I believe that they should be on. If y'all want to say any, that's up to you. I apologize. I was getting distracted by the chats they right out of the corner of my eye. One thing I did want to address, I have seen so many different comments from people who are, bringing up I'll call it a conspiracy, the potential that Trump is going to appoint all of these people to his cabinet, right? Marco Rubio, Elise Stefanik, all of Mike Waltz, trying to think of the people who are currently in Congress, and then he's going to get them in, and then he's going to fire them, and then they're no longer going to be in Congress because they joined his administration. There's somehow this 4D chess conspiracy that is going to happen, and that Trump is going to save us from Marco Rubio in the Senate or something. I personally do not believe that. I do not give Trump that much credit. I don't think that he would, literally make Marco Rubio his Secretary of State, talking about, he's spoken highly of Rubio lately when he's not calling him Little Marco. He's spoken highly of Mike Pompeo and people like that. I personally don't think that he would appoint all of these people to his cabinet just to turn around and fire them and then have to, appoint more people. That seems a little bit far-fetched to me, but I have seen that in so many different comments. It's so many of y'all, I say that broadly with the public, want Trump to be the savior, want him to be the anti-establishment candidate who's going to come in and truly drain the swamp. And when I look at his current cabinet, I do not see evidence of that. I see, once again, it is the same old, same old. I see that Trump has learned who his masters are. He's learned you have to be pro-Israel, therefore you have to be anti-Iran. And you also, because you're a Republican, have to be anti-China. We'll add that in there as well. And I see that current situation kind of lining up, that Trump knows what he has to do to play the game just right. And I do not think it is getting us anywhere good fast. That is for sure. And I think that it's going to be one of those things where, as we continue to keep an eye on who he chooses for his cabinet, who he decides that they are going to be the ones sort of doing his bidding, that there may be some surprises there. I don't expect many surprises now that I have kind of seen how his cabinet has come together, right? Seen how he has established things. Now, I did have a post out on my Patreon earlier today for my paid subscribers. I know some people are saying that you don't have the option for super chats on YouTube, but you do have the option for memberships. I'll be sure to check that out because I have not turned that off. Maybe since this is the first live stream that I've done since my channel, since they returned my channel to me, then they may have turned that off. I'll have to go look at that, but that's good to know. I do have, though, if you want to sign up as a paid subscriber, you can do so over on my page on Substack, which is rachelblevins.substack.com. Also on my page on Patreon, which is patreon.com/rachelblevins. I should have a graphic up with that on the screen. I do not. I'll have that on the next one. But there I had a post on my Patreon earlier today asking, all right, are there any questions for this live stream? One of the questions I did get was, it appears that Trump's cabinet is much more hawkish on China than Russia. I do think it looks that way now, kind of going back to my point that I made earlier about the fact that, look, neocons are neocons always to their core. So right now, it's not popular to be as hawkish on Russia, right? You've got Trump saying he wants to end the war in Ukraine. You've got kind of that back and forth there. So a lot of these Republicans are going to act like, oh, we need to focus on ending that war because they think that that's what Trump wants to hear. They think that that is the right answer to the question. But if we see a situation where Trump comes up with some sort of a plan and Putin comes in and says, no, I'm not doing that, I'm very curious to see how many Russia hawks come out, right? How many people come out and say, no, we need to focus on really taking on Russia, turning up the pressure on Russia, and of course, how that goes for the US if that is the case. Another question that I got was, who the blank is the choice for Secretary of Defense? I have never heard of this guy. Is he from the outside establishment, or has he been lurking at the very bottom of the slum? No, we talked about Pete Hegseth a little bit, and that's kind of how I see it, right? That's kind of the situation where you look at it and you go, wait a second, where did he get this guy? I'm going to be very curious to see how that kind of comes into play. His choice of his Secretary of Defense, clearly very pro-Israel. Maybe Pete Hegseth was on the Adelson's list. They were like Marco Rubio, Pete Hegseth, Elise Stefanik. I guess you could throw Mike Waltz on there too. Really everyone on there, with the exception of, I guess more local positions, or Tulsi Gabbard. Matt Gaetz also apparently has not taken money from the Israeli lobby, according to the AIPAC tracker account that's on X, I believe. If I saw that correctly, I believe they said that he has not. So you know what? We can throw Matt Gaetz in there as well. He probably, most definitely, was not on the Adelson's list. So I will give him that. Trying to figure out, all right, apparently there's something going on with YouTube memberships. I'm not going to mess with that right now, but I will try to get these super chats fixed by the time that I do another live stream, which I would love to do these weekly. That is my goal, and I'm just kind of trying to figure that out. I'm not going to promise that it's going to be every single week, but my goal is to do it weekly when life does not interfere with that. So I've been trying to, I've been putting out videos about 6 days a week, kind of a back and forth of interviews and solo videos that I put out there on certain topics. And I also have a weekly episode series called Sanction, which is exclusively for my paid subscribers. So I wanted to create something that was just for my paid subscribers that gives you an incentive to sign up, whether it's, $5 a month, $10, $20, whatever you are able to, whatever you're comfortable with contributing. And so we have our weekly deep dive that is called Sanction. It's available for my paid subscribers over on Substack and Patreon. Now, I have not added that to YouTube to YouTube memberships because of all of the trouble that I have had with YouTube. I still, I do have memberships up on YouTube. That is still an option that you can sign up for. It gives you a cool little badge and your comment shows up, and it's much more, right? It shows up, it grabs my attention, and I'm able to respond to it. Now, someone else says, I know super chats aren't working. Again, I'll try to fix that one the next time that we do this. And so I do have that option, but I would encourage you, please check out my profiles on other platforms, whether that's Rumble, Substack, and Patreon are both great, because then every time I post something new, you make sure you get it emailed to you, and we have those options. And so definitely check out other alternatives, because while I do have my YouTube channel back, while I am grateful for that, I'm still not trusting it completely, right? You never know what is going to happen. You cannot trust the current situation with the current, with the current setup of the world that we live in. I apologize. I'm getting distracted again. I appreciate all of the comments coming in. Thank you guys for your input and for chiming in. If you like this live stream, let me know if that's something that you want to see more of in the future. If you would chime in on your end, I would really appreciate it. I appreciate you guys showing up and watching this live. I know a lot of you are going to be watching the replay, but thank you for actually watching it live and chiming in on the chat. I think that's going to do it for today. I was going for about an hour. So again, if you want to see the weekly live stream, I will do my best to bring it back on Wednesdays. We'll see what we're able to do next Wednesday, keeping my fingers crossed. And again, thank you guys for chiming in and for making this fun. And I will talk to you next time. And on that note, Blevins out.